each year on September the 28th. In the northwest of China's Shandong province, old city Qufu, a grand ceremony is staged as routine. On this day, people from all over the world come here to attend a memorial ceremony. It's hard to imagine that this ceremony has been sustained for more than 2,500 years. The memorial ceremony was held for one man that every Chinese is proud of, Kongzi, namely Confucius. Confucius was born in 551 BC in Qufu. He was a great thinker in ancient China, also founder of the Confucianism school. His thought has influenced thousands of years of Chinese history. Even today, his ideas still impact on every common folks in this country. In today's Qufu, the ancestral temples for Confucius and other Confucianists and the residences of Confucius' direct descendants, as well as their tombs, are preserved, which covers a total area of around 3,500 mu, or around 233 hectares. Thus, a huge building group composed of approximately 1,000 units came into shape. So it's called Three Kong, namely Mansion of Confucius, Temple of Confucius, and Confucian tombs. The Temple of Confucius is where sacrifices are offered to commemorate the saint in feudal dynasties of ancient China. It is called Chinese First Temple. It's a group of ancient architecture of Oriental characteristics. In 479 BC, Confucius died. The next year, the monarch rebuilt his former residence to a temple, carried on the sacrificial offering every year. In 100 BC, the Confucianist culture became China's legitimate culture gradually. Emperors of generation upon generation gave titles to Confucius and worshipped him, and expanded the Temple of Confucius, which later developed into a group of architectural complex. The Temple of Confucius stretches out on an axis from south to north, where the dignified 5 doors are constructed. The roof is covered with yellow glazed tile. This can only be used on the imperial palace level, upon which we could witness the status of Confucius in history. The Confucian temple major construction is the Taj Mahal. Its scale and momentum could compare with Taihe Hall of the Forbidden City. In front of the hall, 10 dragon stone columns catch people's eyes. Each column carved by a whole stone which was 6 meters high with the diameter 1 meter. On each column there were 2 dragons soaring between the cloud and the waves. 10 columns are different with China's ancient times masterwork in stone carving art field. Even the columns of Taihe Hall of the Forbidden City are inferior in comparison. It is said when Emperor Qianlong offered a sacrifice, Confucius' descendants wrapped the columns to avoid his plan. In the middle of the shrine in Dacheng Hall, there's a high-colored drawing statue of Confucius measuring up to 2 persons' height. In the front of the hall, 2 meters high platform with a sand altar people used to sacrificial offering to Confucius in. Now, every year on September the 28th, grand memorial ceremonies is succeeded. On the east and west sides of the hall, rooms line up, and here 156 previous famous Confucianist memorial tablets are consecrated. In front of the palace, there's a 166 meters long divine path. The divine path is designed on the architect's elaborate creation. Walking inside the corridor path among all these old trees, spontaneously, one would feel a sense of solemnness and sublimity. In the middle of the divine path, there's a pavilion named Apricot Altar, where it is said that Confucius once has lectured. Trailing from the apricot altar southward along the corridor path, next to the Dacheng Gate, there's a Chinese juniper tree. According to the history, Confucius has planted 3 trees himself. Due to long passage of time, the original ones do not exist anymore. The present Chinese juniper tree was a new strip sprouted in 1732. In the Temple of Confucius, olden trees towers to the sky. Through years of trials and tribulation, these trees still stand upright here, has been telling the history of Temple of Confucius. Standing with those old trees, 2,000 tombstones were built by emperors, ministers, or renowned scholars to commemorate Confucius. Today, people deem these calligraphy, painting, and sculpture on them treasury of arts. In order to preserve these tombstones, out of Dacheng Gate, totally 13 tablet pavilions were built for them. For the Dacheng Gate is too close from the tablet pavilion, the designer used a special way when they expanded Dacheng Gate. Between the gate and pavilion, layers of wooden coves joined each other and the palace corners confront mutually, in which way the floor space is saved effectively. The idiom "Gou Xin Dou Jiao" was originally coined to illustrate this kind of architectural composition, and later on it is used to describe people in trick against each other. Out from the east gate of the Temple of Confucius, for several dozen meters, is the entrance door of the Mansion of Confucius. The Mansion of Confucius is the residence of Confucius' direct descendants. Meanwhile, it is also the residence of Yan Shandong. Yan Shandong, which means Duke of Saint Offspring, is a title granted by the royal court from 11th century to those eldest grandsons of the Confucius' direct descendants. Confucius drifts about in destitute before death. After his death, his grandsons of direct descendants are titled generation upon generation by different dynasty rulers, and the Confucius clan became the only nobles which succeeded for several thousand years. The layout of Mansion of Confucius has its own unique characteristics. The office in the front, behind which is a private residence. As Confucius descendants hold a special status, the whole room of Mansion of Confucius looks like a government office. It's a place where Duke Saint descendants received the imperial decree and a government official or dealt with law cases. Also, it served as a ceremonial spot for festivity. Both sides of the hall had weapons like axes, sword, and spears, etc. These layouts symbolized the status of the host of the Mansion of Confucius. Whenever Duke Saint descendants went out, the weapons were guarded by designated personnel to manifest its solemnness. Between the house and the office, there is a forbidden gate, strictly guarded around the clock. No one is allowed to get in or out without permission. West side of the forbidden gate is a specially manufactured stone groove. The waterman would pour the water into the stone groove from outside to let it flow into inside for the residents' usage. It is strictly guarded to make the lineage of Duke Saint descendants to be pure. The first room inside is a place where the master received the relatives and friends. In the courtyard there is a special mural. A manticore is painted on it. It is said its natural disposition was greedy, eat wealth. The manticore also intended to swallow the sun. The master placed this picture on an eye-catching spot in order to warn the descendants not to take bribes or pervert the law. The family members lived in the second courtyard. Luxurious rooms placed with all kinds of precious calligraphy and painting work and the daily necessities. Today the layout and placement of articles still stay intact. In the ruin of Kong De Chang, Confucius' 77th generation of grandson, the last duke's descendants, people can still see these matrimonial articles. The Mansion of Confucius was built comparable to the royal family level. However, too much formalized and square style of the courtyard lacks an air of living, and those who live inside might feel a bit too rigid. Behind the layers of courtyards, a big enlightening garden is presented, which occupies 2 times the area of all courtyards. Only with combination of a beautiful backyard garden and the orderly arranged courtyards can we name it a complete picture of Mansion of Confucius. Today, only a small corner remains, but the quiet and elegance require people to imagine this big garden of Confucius' residence. In the garden, a Qing dynasty mural is preserved. Appreciated from any angle, one can feel the alley is facing oneself. This picture has utilized a skillful perceptive technique. This mural tells the owner's open manner toward foreign culture. Along Old Chifu City to north, there's a long stretching divine path. You can see a 6-column and 5-gate stone memorial arches. Constructed in 1594, relief dragons on the arches are delicately carved. Walking through the stone memorial arches, one arrives at a designated cemetery spot, Confucian tombs. After Confucius died, he was buried by Sishui River in north of Chifu City. At the time, the tomb was very small. Along with Confucius' status elevation, all previous monarchs not only rebuilt the Temple of Confucius and expanded the Mansion of Confucius, but also bestowed Confucius' descendants grave field many times. Until now, Confucian tombs has more than 100,000 tombs and 3,600 tombstones. The area is 3 times of Chifu City. It is the best preserved clan cemetery in the world for the longest time and covering the biggest area. Visiting here, one could see tombs of different dynasties, and the Confucian tombs have become a museum of Chinese ancient tomb burial ceremony. Across Shishui Bridge, there is a refined cemetery. Here buried Confucius as well as sons and grandsons. This is the center of entire Confucian tombs. Both sides of the corridor to the cemetery standing some stone animals. In front of the sacrifice hall, 2 giant stone images are guarding the deceased person's soul. This grave looks normal. 2,500 years ago, an outstanding thinker, Confucius, was buried here. Kong Li's tomb is on the east side of his father Confucius. Confucius' grandson Kong Ji also is a famous Confucianist scholar. His body was interred in the south of his grandfather's. It is said this kind of grave layout deferred to the special local customs, which is vividly called Grand Family Reunion. It is said after Confucius' death, his students built a thatched cottage nearby the tomb and stayed beside his tomb for 3 years. After 3 years, one of the disciples, called Zigong, also lived solitarily for another 3 years. It is said here is a place where Zigong stayed with the graveyard. During that time, Zigong has planted a tree here. The branch grew into the big tree. Then it is burned down by the thunder fire. Today, only a stump is left. When Confucius' disciples came to hold a memorial ceremony for him, trees from other places were also brought and planted around the cemetery. Woods made up of lush olden trees came into being through years of this sort of practice. The entire Confucian tombs, countless graves, the tombstones stand in great numbers with stone images and memorial arches, all setting of one another under green trees, does not have the creepy silence like the other tombs, is like lonesome and quiet botanical gardens. The Temple of Confucius, Mansion of Confucius, and Confucian tombs are the cultural heritage, which is well known all over the world. Meanwhile, here retained massive valuable natural heritages. 17,000 oak trees not only witnessed three Kong's history development, also serve as a precious source for studying ancient climatology and ecology. In December 1994, the Temple of Confucius, Mansion of Confucius, and Confucian tombs were listed as a World Heritage by World Legacy Organization.